Ladies and gentlemen, MrCropper here. We will now continue with Project Immanuel Kant, Critique of Pure Reason. When we left off before, he was saying that he's putting together a tribunal to investigate, to do a critical investigation of pure reason. And then he said, remember he said the sciences have accomplished so much, but philosophy is just floating hoity-toity, and he wants philosophy to be on solid grounds, like science. So that's what he says his endeavor is. Okay. I do not mean by this a criticism of books and systems, but a critical inquiry into the faculty of reason. So, we're not going to talk about different people's theories and stuff. We're going to talk about reason as such, with reference to the cognitions to which it strives to attain without the aid of experience. So we're talking about thoughts outside the aid of experience. Now, just let's pause and use our own heads for a second here. Let's remember that things that are outside of the realm of experience means things that are outside the realm of reality. Means things that are outside reality. Okay? If it has nothing to do with experience and can't be gotten to in any way with experience, and it doesn't ever reduce to experience and it isn't connected to experience, then it is something like string theory, for example, which is just floating math junk. So, he's talking about things which are attained without the aid of experience. That's his whole concern, is the realm of ideas beyond experience, which, I'll just remind you, is junk floating junk. Junkety junk junk. Okay? That's the realm with which he is concerned. Which he said so earlier, didn't he? He said earlier, this Platonic floating realm is a bit of a mess, and we're going to need a bit of order in it. And he's going to set down the order. So he continues with this. In other words, the solution of the question regarding the possibility or impossibility of metaphysics and the determination of the origin, as well as the extent and limits of this science. Now, what does he mean by the possibility or impossibility of metaphysics? Does he mean, therefore, now, metaphysics means something different for him than us. So let's give him metaphysics as meaning that which is beyond the physical, meaning the abstract. Let's give him the abstract as the metaphysics, because literally the Latin is beyond physical. So, he's asking whether things beyond the physical are possible or impossible. He needs to solve this question of whether they are possible or impossible. Now, metaphysics is, okay, it's just a totally different thing from what objectivists think of as metaphysics. So, he's saying if it's possible for us to deal in metaphysics, that's one thing, but it might be impossible. So that's what I really take him to be doing in that sentence there. He's putting up the possibility that it might be impossible for us to actually deal in the realms of cognition. It might be impossible. And the determination of the origin as well as the extent and limits of this science. The extent and limits. See, there's where he says it might be impossible to actually deal in this science. All this must be done on the basis of principles. Now, he is going to be talking about principles dealing with metaphysics that determine whether or not the faculty of reason is able to strive to attain without the aid of experience. That is how I digest that sentence, and you, ladies and gentlemen, can rewind and check and see if that fits for yourself. But that's what I think he's up to. All right. Next sentence, next paragraph. This path The only one now remaining, so we're stuck on this one. We have to do it this way. We have to do what this way? Reform the Platonic realm without connection to sensory data? We're stuck on this. We have to do this. This path has been entered upon by me. And I flatter myself, yes, you do, that I have in this way discovered the cause and consequently the mode of removing all the errors. I've discovered the cause of all the errors, and I've discovered how to remove all the errors which have hitherto set reason at variance with itself. Now, where is reason at variance with itself? He declares above, you can go watch the video again if you want and get the text and read it if you want. There's a link below. He declares reason is at variance with itself in the realms above sensory perception, right? Earlier he said whenever we leave these principles of sense perception behind and go up above into the principles that aren't connected to sense perception, then there's disagreement and we're all arguing and it's floating and you can't tell what your ideas are doing anymore. So, if reason is at variance with itself, then he's saying that reason is both present when you're cogitating about the real world and the senses, and reason is present when you're cogitating about nothing in floating Platonic la-la land. Now that would violate Aristotle's definition of reason. Aristotle would say you're only using reason if and when you're checking it through the senses, and everything that you're saying is related to the senses. So this violates Aristotle's view of reason. Reason, according to Aristotle's view of reason, reason would not be at variance with itself in this way. Aristotle would dismiss that la-la land floaty stuff as not reason, clearly because it is not connected to the senses. But Kant is not really giving us any explanation as to why that stuff could be defined as reason. Why can we include that with the reasonable when previously the reasonable had to mean the sensible? Literally meaning senses, literally from the senses. Did you think of that, ladies and gentlemen? If it makes sense, that means it makes 5 senses information. If it doesn't make sense, that means you can't get to it through the 5 senses. If it's nonsense, that means you can't get any senses information about it, any sense information. Okay? So when things don't make sense, that literally means they're not connected through the senses. So he is redefining reason here. Just wanted you to be aware of what's going on. So he says errors which have set reason at variance with itself. What errors have set reason at variance with itself except in Platonic floating nonsense, which is not reason? Okay. In the sphere of non-empirical thought, full stop. In the sphere of non-empirical thought. Empirical thought being the sphere of the 5 senses. Okay. So he declares himself that this is Pony la-la land he's talking about, and in that same sentence he says Pony la-la land is a realm of reason, and the confusion there shows that reason has problems. Okay? You judge for yourself, ladies and gentlemen. Is it reason that has problems, or is it Immanuel Kant that has problems? Okay? But continuing. I have not returned an evasive answer to the question of reason. Judge for yourselves. By alleging the inability and limitation of the faculties of the mind, I have, on the contrary, examined them completely in light of principles. Now, what sort of principles would you use? Oh, it doesn't matter, just any principles, but they have to be principles. He sounds like an anarchist. He starts with principles. You're not starting with the 5 senses? No. The 5 senses were not sufficient because there were realms of reason disconnected from the 5 senses that were disorderly. So we had to put those in order, and that's where these principles come. And after having discovered the cause of the doubts and contradictions into which reason fell, can we have some examples of the contradictions into which reason fell? It fell into those, as he himself declares, by leaving the realm of the 5 senses. He himself declares that. He says, when we leave the realm of the 5 senses, we fall into these troubles. Okay, so after he's discovered the cause of the doubts and contradictions, he has solved them to its perfect satisfaction. Now, if you ask me or Aristotle, the cause of those contradictions and doubts is that they're not sensible. In other words, not related to reality, and just made up la-la land. He, however, has sorted them out and has solved them to its perfect satisfaction. Geez, didn't above he say something about... he said, I flatter myself that I have da-da-da-da-da. He certainly at least is able to introspect that far, isn't he? All right, continuing. It is true, these questions have not been solved as dogmatism, in its vein, fancies and desires, had expected. For it can only be satisfied by the exercise of magical arts, and of these I have no knowledge. Have not been solved as dogmatism. Oh, haven't been given religious dogmatism, because dogmatism, Catholic Church, okay. So he hasn't set it down in dogmatism that we can give out as dogma now. For it can only be satisfied by the exercises of magical arts, and I have no knowledge of these. So he dismisses religion. You can see why religious people hated him. But neither do these come within the compass of our mental powers. And it was the duty of philosophy to destroy the illusions which had their origin in misconceptions, whatever darling hopes and valued expectations may be ruined by its explanation. So, he says, I may have upset some people, I may have destroyed some things, but that's just their little darling hopes and expectations. It was the duty of philosophy to destroy these illusions and misconceptions. So, ladies and gentlemen, if he did destroy anything, now he says he was trying to erect a new foundation of solid, pure reason, right? He says he was trying to erect a solid foundation of reason. He says that he's trying to save reason from the disorder that was present, right? But he also says, if I've destroyed anything, they were just illusions. So he admits that he destroyed stuff. My chief aim in this work has been thoroughness, and I make bold to say that there is not a single metaphysical problem that does not find its solution, or at least the key to its solution, here. Alright, now to some extent what he's saying there, we would have to say it's correct, because his philosophy is sufficient to build a tremendous amount of floating gobbledygook, right? From Marxism on up to postmodernism and everything in between. So he's right there. It's thorough. It's a thorough system. Like Ayn Rand said, very false but very fancy. Now he continues, pure reason is a perfect unity, and therefore if the principle presented by it prove to be insufficient for the solution of even a single one of those questions to which the very nature of reason gives birth, we must reject it. Okay? Pure reason is a perfect unity, and we have to reject it if the principle presented by it proves to be insufficient for the solution of even a single question. Okay, so if there's anything at all that we can't answer using reason, we have to reject it. Because reason is a perfect unity. So reason stands or falls on its own. Okay? As we could not be perfectly certain of its sufficiency in the case of the other. So it stands and falls on its own, because if one area of it falls, then the other areas, we can't be certain of why they would stand on their own. Now, that's a bit of... I'll just do the sentence again. You see if it's an assertion or not. Pure reason is a perfect unity. Is it just an assertion, or is he going to explain why this is the case? Therefore, if the principle presented by it prove to be insufficient for the solution of even a single one of those questions to which the very nature of reason give birth, we must reject it, as we could not be perfectly certain of its sufficiency in the case of the others. Okay, it doesn't seem that he proved that it's a unity, but if it's a unity, it does stand either by itself or doesn't. Now, what does he mean by pure reason, and what does he mean by a perfect unity? Well, he doesn't really say, and then he says, and therefore. So that entire thought is pretty assertive. He's really sticking a flag in the ground there and not really saying what he's doing with it. I'm sure. Okay, pure reason is a perfect unity. Is he justifying why he has to defend it? Okay, well, let's continue. While I say this, I think I see upon the countenance of the reader signs of dissatisfaction. Really? Did you realize 250 years later I would read that sentence and go, what the hell does he mean there? Yes, he does see signs of dissatisfaction on my face, mingled with contempt. Immanuel Kant, are you reading my very thoughts? Did you write that sentence knowing that you would elicit that sort of response from rational, reasonable people? Is he trolling us across 250 years? This is amazing. Yes, you're right. I'm dissatisfied and I'm contemptuous. The reader will feel this when he hears declarations which sound so boastful and extravagant, and yet they are beyond comparison more moderate than those advanced by the commonest author of the commonest philosophical program, in which the dogmatist professes to demonstrate the simple nature of the soul or the necessity of primal being. All right, well, I'm not into the simple nature of the soul, and I'm not into the necessity of primal being. What is primal being? Is that the existence of nature as such? Okay, so he is, if the simple nature of the soul means that there's nothing platonic about it, it's just a Lockean entity, and if the necessity of primal being means the necessity of existence as such, as a primacy, then he is besmirching and smearing people who believe in the human being. A simple human being is the essence of mankind, and the existence of nature as primacy, as primary. So the existence of nature as primary and an individual human being are more boastful and extravagant than he is. He is less boastful and extravagant than someone who believes in an individual human being or the primacy of existence. All right. It's quite a doozy, quite an attack on the audience. Such a dogmatist. Ooh, you're a dogmatist if you believe in the existence of reality or in the simple nature of the soul. Now, what is the simple nature of the soul exactly? I'm going to take it to mean the Aristotelian individual. But because that's what I think he lived in the Enlightenment. He was probably attacking the Aristotelian individual. So he says, such a dogmatist promises to extend human knowledge beyond the limits of possible experience. Do they? While I humbly confess... Now, where do they... I thought we said that things that are beyond the limits of experience were nonsense. That was our word. Well, maybe he's talking about religious people. Is he attacking religious people? Is he an atheist? Okay, so be it. Such a dogmatist promises to extend human knowledge beyond the limits of experience, while I humbly confess that this is completely beyond my power. Instead of any such attempt, he's not trying to extend knowledge beyond experience. Instead of such an attempt, I confine myself to the examination of reason alone and its pure thought. So he's just examining it. He's not extending knowledge, he's just examining it. Okay? And I do not need to seek far for the sum total of its cognition, because it has its seat in my own mind. So, I can just sit and think inside my own mind about my own cogitations, cognitions, and that will be sufficient for my task, right? I do not need to seek far for the sum total of its cognition, because it has its seat in my own mind. Yes, he doesn't need to look anywhere outside of himself. He can look inside of his own brain to think about these things. Right? Okay. Besides, common logic presents me with a complete and systematic catalog of all the simple operations of reason. So he's just going to take common logic as a given, as a metaphysically given. He says, besides, common logic provides me with a bunch of stuff. It is my task to answer the question how far reason can go without the material presented and the aid furnished by experience. All right, well, Aristotle said zero. It can't go anywhere without the material provided by experience. So you judge for yourself, ladies and gentlemen. What is Immanuel Kant's whole system all about? What is his categories all about? He says for himself right there, besides, common logic prevents me with a complete systematic dialogue of all the simple operations of reason. And it is my task to answer the questions how far reason can go without the material presented and aid furnished by experience. How far, just what exactly can we do with reason once we leave reality behind? That is his task to answer, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we will continue from there in the next video. If you appreciate what I'm doing, if you appreciate MrCropper doing this sort of activity, then please patronize me. If you're already patronizing me, whatever, can I guilt trip you into increasing it? No, we need to get some more people on. There's like 8 of you on my Patreon as I do this video. So if you're watching all the way to the end, I would request that you please share this video and spread it around a little bit and let people know that MrCropper is trying to get his channel back on track and trying to become maybe a professional intellectual, maybe even travel around and argue with people and debate and stuff. But I'm going to have to get some support from the objective sphere and whoever else will support me in order to do this, because I've been demonetized by Google and that's all hopeless now. So if you appreciate what we're doing here, go on Patreon and throw me $5 or $10 a month and help me build up a revenue stream that can allow me to dedicate some time to this sort of activity.